Hey there, and thank you so much for joining us again on Finding Peace with Carol Howe. In addition to being the time of year when peace is celebrated in greetings and in song, it is also predictably the time for overindulgence in many ways. It's old news that the holidays have become, for so many, commercial enterprises with lip service to goodwill and peace on earth, but hardly ever taken really seriously as a way of life, to which the turmoil in our world testifies. So, what if we decided to take peace on earth seriously in our own little corner of the world, in our own specific lives with the circumstances that just make up our everyday experience? To take that seriously requires that we become peaceful ourselves. And that requires an honest relationship with ourselves, looking deeply within and honoring what we find there and not judging it. We are not being honest when we're hard on ourselves or presume that we're not worth much or undeserving in some way, because those things are simply never true about the truth and substance of our very being. Our behavior can certainly be off base, but the spiritual presence of us is beyond the possibility of change or ruin. We inherently remain loving and lovable despite our mistaken and decidedly unloving behavior. Our guest today writes of her addiction to food, her refuge when she feels discontent, and her own deep longing for release from this addiction and a return to a real, settled peace of mind. And she's tried so hard and been so unsuccessful with all the approaches she's tried, and so chastened by her ego that just keeps whispering in her ear about how bad she is, which is totally not true. So we're going to sort all this out in this session and do everything we can to set her on a path to healing that actually works. No matter what your circumstance, I feel certain that our conversation will be an eye-opener for you as well, for all of us, including me. So now let's look forward to what unfolds. Kathy, thanks a million for calling and for writing, because I'll tell you what, you've got one of the most important issues and questions that we could possibly talk about. So just so that our listeners will know, you wrote, and the timing is great since this is the holiday season, that you've just had a love-hate relationship with food for a long time. Is that a fair way to talk about it?
Definitely.
Okay. And you listed that you've tried all sorts of things to overcome the urge to eat. And you've noted that they don't work. No matter how hard you try, willpower, which is what comes up, at least as I read your email, it seems like you have diligently and earnestly and in good faith tried to use willpower to fight against the urge to eat. Is that a correct way of talking about this?
Well, I think I've tried everything. It's not just willpower, because, I try and meditate every morning and pray and things like that. But then as soon as an emotional issue comes up, I definitely turn to food to make me feel better.
Okie dokie. Well, one of the things I hear in that is that, okay, in a sense, my prayerfulness and my meditation and so on is trying to fix something or make something happen or whatever. But I'll tell you what we've got to look at is that emotional disturbance when you say, oh, well, I do pretty well until I start to feel some distress of some kind, and then it's kind of all over from there. So
Correct.
I want to back up and take a look at the emotional distress. And there's a big reason for that, because our actions, in other words, our thoughts, our actions, all the things that we do in this world, all are driven by what we believe. And what we believe is also responsible for this emotional distress that you're trying to do something about. So it just reminds me of a train where you've got the engine and you've got a bunch of cars that it's pulling behind it. And the engine might be equated to these core beliefs. Some of them we don't even realize as core beliefs, but our foundational notions about ourselves and the world and so on and so forth. And from that stem our choices, our actions, our words, our thoughts, just like train cars. In other words, the train cars cannot independently decide at the next block I'm leaving and I'm going to make a right-hand turn. In other words, they are inevitably hooked to the engine. Fair to say?
I like that analogy.
So the idea, so that the emotions that we're feeling, that food is attempting to medicate, are tied to some things that you believe about yourself, about the world, about your place in it, about your value, and so on. So what we can do is use an addiction like this and reverse engineer it, so to speak, right up the line to see what's going on at this most causative level. Because if I don't fix it there, I can't fix it anywhere. Does that picture in your mind make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so let's get back to the specifics of, give me an example of, and some sort of an emotional something or another that sends you to the refrigerator. And we'll take a look at this.
The first word that came up was rejection. So I think it's probably rejection in any way, whether it's romantic rejection or in work, or just sort of like not feeling good enough.
Exactly. So, and though that idea, you might say, of not good enough and I'm about to be ostracized or abandoned or whatever, has got an emotion obviously associated with it. In other words, something that feels distressing. And we don't have to get any more specific than just distressing or upsetting. And then we kind of put words around it that I'm feeling rejected or left out or not good enough. So let's take the words away at the moment and get back down to the raw feeling. And by definition, since it's a feeling, you can't put accurate words on it. I mean, we try, and things like feeling rejected or abandoned are like pointers that somehow point to a feeling that by definition is not about words. So normally, every one of us have been conditioned, so to speak, to decide that feeling this feeling is not good. And so
It's
tell
definitely
me
a horrible feeling.
Okay, great. And so all that you've ever learned in your whole life is that a horrible feeling shouldn't happen, or a horrible feeling has no right to be here, or a horrible feeling is something that should be hated and pushed away as much as possible. Is that accurate? I mean, you probably haven't thought of it that way, but isn't that your obvious response to the feeling?
Yes.
Okay, and so you think, what if I decided to change my mind about the awfulness of that feeling of upset or distress? What if I would do something outlandish and decide, you know what, rather than just having a knee-jerk, immediate response that I want this to go away as quickly as possible, what if I just thought, well, what is this about? As if it were some exotic animal that had just wandered into your yard. And you think, I think I'm just going to fully be present with this emotional experience. Have you ever even thought that way about an emotion?
I have. I have tried to be present with, when like an urge comes up for a binge or something like that. And, what I found is it's very, it's a very horrible feeling. And
Right.
I try and sit with it, but, I can hear my ego, I'll sit with it and my ego is going to say, but if you just had that candy bar, it would go away. Or if you just ordered pizza, it'll be fine. I'll sit with it and it's like, it's going to be like this forever. And I can literally hear my ego arguing with me and then giving me all these reasons why I should eat something. And, the sugar rush does make me feel better. So it's a very complex situation when it comes up because it's this horrible feeling. And then I was like, no, but you are hungry. You do need to eat, and like,
Right, you just make up, the ego mind makes up all sorts of stories. Well, so since everybody is acquainted with that ego, you might say dictator that orders us around and says you can't do this and you have to do this and pay attention to me kind of thing. And it has never occurred to us to say, get lost. Your advice and counsel has been terrible. It's been terrible on the grounds that I've listened to you over and over and over about this, and it has not solved the problem. So why should I listen to advice which absolutely, from my own immediate direct experience, does not work? Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, I think in the moment, kind of when I'm tempted to binge or to eat when I'm not hungry, the ego is rationalizing. There's always evidence. Like, say, for example, there was something in work that I messed up in, or, as I said, like if it was a romantic rejection or a fight with your romantic partner or something, there's proof. Do you know what I mean? So the ego is sort of saying, well, you are a loser because you messed up in work, or you've been romantically rejected. Like, there's always proof. Like, there's evidence.
Well, here's the thing that's interesting, and that is the events that you're referring to. Let's say a certain thing happening at work or a certain interaction with somebody. Notice how the ego mind is making an interpretation about what those circumstances mean. In other words, you see that you just said that great big long sentence as a whole unit without stopping to think, what if my whatever it is I did at work doesn't mean I've screwed up at all? What if it doesn't mean the things about me that my ego mind has decided they mean? Look at what it's doing. The ego mind is making up stories based on, we'll just call them neutral events or neutral circumstances. It's using that and saying, see how awful you are? Now, because you are so awful and therefore ought to feel so terrible about this, now I'm going to show you what to do about it. It's like, oh, this is like a closed loop of your own interpretation about these things, your own, let's not say yours, let's say your ego's interpretation that says you are terrible. Now, once you buy into the idea that you are terrible for whatever reasons, whether it's work or personal or anything else, that is a threatening thought, is it not? I mean, how could that not be a threatening thought to really begin to buy into the idea that you're terrible because you're going to just know that punishment is running down the street trying to find you? In other words, we
Yes.
can't think we're terrible without believing that there are going to be awful consequences. Now, here's where we see how the physiology plays into this. This is why it's so important for us to see how the psychology and the physiology operate as a seamless whole. What happens when you get that, oh my God, what's going to happen when everybody finds out how terrible I am, or some thought that's essentially like that? The brain takes note of your sense of danger, like that feeling of I'm not safe. And once you feel like you are not safe, you might say the back part of the brain, the fight or flight survival part of the brain, springs into action. Because although we evolved that part of the brain so that we could escape from physical danger, this is part of the survival of the fittest kind of thing, the ego mind hijacks that system. In other words, the poor old brain doesn't know the difference between you're deciding that you're awful, and if that were true, then something unfortunate would occur as a result of that. In other words, you would be unsafe, or if a pack of wolves is about to come crashing through your door. In other words, it doesn't know, it doesn't ask you a question and say, are you really unsafe, or are you making this all up? Is this just your opinion about things? It takes you at your word. If you basically are thinking thoughts that for you bring up a sense of lack of safety, your body springs into action and does everything possible. And all of the chemicals that are therefore dumped into the body chemistry, because since it's taking you at its word, it's preparing you to put all the energy into your arms and legs so that you can fight or you can run. And those chemicals are taken up into all of the cells in the body, and that is causing the feeling of horribleness that you feel. In other words, there is this specific direct link from thoughts that say, I'm not safe, to the body responding just like it thinks it's being asked to do, and preparing you for whatever's coming down the pipe. But that leaves you in this very distressed, upset state. Okay, so now it's our thoughts that have caused our body chemistry to do what it's doing, resulting in our horrible emotional state. I mean, I'm quoting you, I'm not calling it horrible, but what we've decided is horrible. And instead of allowing it to pass on through, we now stop it. We go, this feeling, and I'm going to put this in parentheses, which I have just unwittingly created for myself. I'm not going to allow to follow what's, I love it. I'm sitting here at my desk waving my arms around like you can see what I'm doing. So it's like we've put up a dam when we say, this feeling is not okay with me, and I will not allow it to happen. I will not feel it. I won't own it. I'm not going to have anything to do with it. Get me to my refrigerator. So you think, okay, my first mistake was at the head of this process where I added the interpretation based on all my early conditioning, which is another story, but where I made the declaration, I am not okay. I am a terrible person. And from that belief, remember, that's what starts all of this. From that belief, my body creates what it creates, including my emotional state. Now, my body knows how, if I will just leave it alone, to allow these chemicals to dissipate. However, I don't allow that to happen once I say, this is a terrible experience, I don't want to be having it, and I start pushing against it and resisting it. And that's happening when I run to food. In other words, it's like, this is not okay, that what I have just caused to happen is happening. See, we leave out that part in the middle about how I have caused it to happen kind of thing with what I believe. So the only way that the emotional state can actually now be resolved is to allow it to be without any judgment, without any conversation to yourself about it, without any condemnation, without any, there's something the matter with this. It's just, what if I just do this unthinkable thing, which is to just sit here, open my mind, open my heart, open whatever all else there is to open my DNA, and just let this be, in which case it will settle and pass on through. Have you ever heard of such a thing?
I have, and I have tried it, and I might succeed for a few minutes. But as I said, like the problem is my ego will say, but there's evidence. Like say, for example, this Christmas Day, I was with my family, and I know we're grown up at this stage, but Santa forgot me. He bought presents for all my brothers and sisters, and then was like, "Oh, I forgot about you." And so this was sort of, it felt very upsetting, but there was a lot of proof, and I think I literally binged all Christmas Day, because I felt, well, this is evidence that I'm not lovable. That my father would buy presents for everybody else but me.
I can absolutely see how your ego mind could take that and run with it. But there's a part of this that is not being figured into the equation, because the tale, as you're telling it, acts like the beginning of this great big long chain of events begins with, my father forgot me. And then I felt terrible and blah, 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 and then I had to eat all day. But this actual whole story starts with a prologue that you're leaving out. Would you like to look at that? In other words, the father forgetting you at Christmas time is step 2, not step 1. So now I've got to go back to step 1 and say, I wonder how it seems to have come to pass that my father could remember everybody else in the family and not me. That's because some of my earliest beliefs and conditioning, and we've talked before, and I'm sure we'll talk again, as to how all that falls into place before we're born in our very earliest days. But what you have carried forward, and I'm going to add a parenthetical phrase that says, what I'm about to say is not true and you do not deserve it. But there is a belief that's carried forward about your being unlovable, about your being simply not okay by virtue of existing. There's a part of you that believes that you're just plain lacking and guilty and can't do anything right. And these beliefs, my very, very, very dear, dear Kathy, those beliefs preceded Christmas. Those beliefs preceded being in the first grade. Those beliefs have been hanging around from the beginning. And it's those beliefs that cause these circumstances, so to speak, of like, see, here's proof that I'm not lovable because look, how could anybody think anything else? But it's your belief that is absolutely unfounded, but that we all carry with us in one way or the other, that kind of informs, shall we say, the energy field that just kind of makes it that the father forgets. Now, if you leave out this prologue that says it's the things that we believe that instruct the people around us, and this all happens at an energy level, then it just looks like we're a victim. And it just looks like somehow other things and other people get to decide what will happen in my life, and from that, my awful experience occurs, and then I will have to eat. But if I will back up and say, what if I really have, for the longest time, even though I haven't examined it, what if I really have felt not okay? So you tell me, if you go back 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, I don't know how old you are, can you recall that things kind of like this have happened more than once?
Oh, for sure. You know, when you said the words, you can never do anything right, they were literally things that my parents would say to me when I was, as a child.
Yes.
So it definitely, it's a feeling that I've held with me since, I think I was pretty happy up until 5. So sort of whenever, from maybe 6 or 7 onwards, carrying those feelings of not being good enough or not being able to do anything right.
Well, actually, a lot of that unfortunate programming was happening long before you were 5. But you just, after all, our ability to remember, our ability to self-talk, we don't even really feel fully a separate person until we're 3 years old. So by the time we become aware that I am a little girl, much of the damage has been done in terms of like installing those early programs about not being okay. And it's so, we so misconnect the dots. I've been at this my whole life, and I still discover things. I just discovered the other day, not long ago, because of something that was happening, and I was having this conversation with myself, and I said, blah, 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 like why couldn't a certain thing be happening, and the details don't matter, because I'm a really nice person, and my ego mind says, actually, you really aren't a very nice person, and so you don't deserve this at all. And I thought, I can't believe this is still lingering around in some form, but I can see when I use that word nice, since in my family, the worst thing you could do ever was offend someone. I grew up in the South where everybody's supposed to be nice at all costs, no matter what. And I can imagine as a little tiny person, having the message be, you've offended somebody and so you aren't nice. And so without any ability to make any sense of this, it kind of goes thunk, it kind of falls in there. Now this is a truth about me, so to speak. So this idea that you can't do anything right is first of all, is completely false. And it's completely a conditioned thing. And I have to know that this is a conditioned thing, an idea, and not the truth, or I ultimately can't ever have anything be different. In other words, that's why trying to solve a problem by entering into the stream of what happens partway through it can't ever work. I've got to go back to the beginning to see. I learned, as every single human being has learned, that I'm guilty of somehow not being okay. And the crimes, quote unquote, that we accuse ourselves of and believe about ourselves when we're very small, and some we bring forward through our DNA, none of them are true, and every one of us goes through this same process. So at some point, when in this case, the father forgets you, and the ego says, see, this is proof. You see, you've referred several times to, but there's always proof. Well, the ego is going to make proof of this because that's its job to do that. It's not your friend. It's actually your enemy. And it's going to consistently tell you how not okay you are. What it is that programming brought forward from the beginning. But this is where an entirely different approach would be, well, what this brings up for me, this is so important to hear. What this brings up for me is, see, I am absolutely unlovable. So rather than saying, well, there you go, there's proof of that, instead you go, great, I now have uncovered a notion that I have carried with me for as long as I can remember, and today is the day I change course with this. And I look at this thought in my mind and I say, this is absolutely not true. There's not a shred of truth to it. In fact, I will declare, because my declarations about myself are much more important than anybody else's. Everybody else's actually are an echo of what my my declaration to myself is, and that is, I am an absolutely precious and beautiful and valuable and one-of-a-kind person. End of story. This is not debatable. I'm going to think about this. I'm going to remember it. This is a reprogramming that must happen now. What do you think?
I'm not. It's really difficult to try and put yourself into a situation. Because I'm not in I'm not in a binge state right now. Do you know what I'm trying to imagine what it's like? But as I said, I think that I really have tried to, whenever I'm kind of in a binge, it's sort of like I kind of go into this trance. It's sort of like I start each day with great intentions, and then I get triggered by a situation. It's not every day, but, certainly I know when this happens, it's sort of, this force comes over me, and I know that, well, right now I'm sort of saying, okay, well, if I was in the situation and I was really trying to say what you're saying, I am a good and lovable person, again, it would be like I would have this chorus of judges proving to me, why I'm not a good person, and it's just a really, really tricky situation.
Well, here's the thing that I'm glad you've brought up. This is a two-step process. When the horrible feeling comes up, which is directly related to your notions, that's all they are, the notions that you're not okay and that you're terribly unlovable, that you're terrible and unlovable and can't do anything right. In other words, those are very big, threatening ideas to your very psychological being. And so you're going to create a horrible emotional feeling out of those highly hateful and awful and attacking ideas about yourself, okay? So now you've got the horrible feeling. You've got to deal with the horrible feeling first before you try to do any of the reprogramming. One of the things that I find people try to do all the time is the horrible feeling comes up and they immediately try to think differently, think differently, think differently. It's like, no, you can't think differently when you're in the middle of a horrible feeling. You've got to give all your undivided, very open-hearted and loving and non-resisting attention. In other words, when the horrible feeling comes up, it's like, okay, everything is going to have to wait, and I'm going to go sit down, or depending upon where you are, and I'm going to completely open to my job at this moment is to do nothing but welcome this feeling. At this point, your intellectual mind, your ability to think about anything is going to be turned off. Because at this point, it not only is not helpful, it's a tremendous hindrance. It's like, I'm going to sit right here, and I'm not going to move out of this chair until I just fully get acquainted with, be right in, I'm going to dive into this, so to speak, like I'm going to feel it to the fullest. Can you recall ever having that, I open my arms and my mind and my heart to this feeling? And I'm not going to think about it or where it comes from, and I am not listening to my ego mind, because that's thinking.
Okay. It's sort of, I think I have tried it, or sorry, I know I have tried it, but it's sort of so horrible. And then my ego mind does sort of step in, as I said, with like 12,000 points of evidence throughout my whole life. Sort of like.
Well, see, that's the point. It's like, don't indulge it. I mean, just because it wants to clamor away, it's like, no, this is my. In other words, if the mad rapist of wherever you live came charging in the door and said, I'm about to destroy you and your property and the neighborhood, and declare war on the state, you wouldn't go, okay, come right in, fine with me. I mean, you wouldn't be so cooperative with madness coming in your door. So it's like, don't be cooperative. That means when your mind wants to start to think, you go, no, I'm in charge here. And right now, all I'm going to do is pay attention to this feeling, and I don't want any input, period. In other words, you can decide where your attention goes. There's the habit of, like, at this point, veering off and paying attention to the so-called proof about how terrible you are. But now it's like you've got to step up to the plate, not in any pushing against. That's the whole problem, the pushing against, but just saying, I hear you, I'm not listening. Right now, this is what I'm going to do, is to feel how I feel. I'm going to honor this process and let it finally finish. Let it come to its own conclusion. Let my own body chemistry settle. I'm going to simply be here with it. No resisting, hating, hiding, running from, pushing against, or anything else. I'm finally going to do the one thing I've never done, which is to just completely be here with it. See, you can see how the ego mind has been given too much latitude to just make the rules. And it's like, so you're not going to be fighting against it. You're just going to say no to it. Like, no. The answer is no. Now I will feel what I feel.
Okay, and then how do you find the evidence that you are a good and lovable person?
Well,
how do you tap into that feeling?
Well, let's put it this way. In the beginning, we bought into the conditioning, part of the enculturation process, that you're not okay. In other words, that is completely false. So now what you're going to do is, you know what? I'm going to count on the fact. We've been told, and it's absolutely true, that we actually, as we are created, now I'm not talking about your body in which your parents had. In other words, this isn't at the physical time and space level, but the presence you are, the energy field that you are, the invisible part that you are, the part of anybody that's missing in a dead body, that part of you is, was, always will be. I have to use all three tenses because it's really an out of time circumstance. Is, was created lovable and blessed and brilliant and light filled and perfect and peaceful and happy and joyful and fun. That's the way you were created. And because that's built into the spirit that you are, nothing can alter it. Nothing can change this loving presence that you actually are. Now, you can close your eyes to it, you can ignore it, you can listen to your conditioning, you can listen to your ego mind instead, but you cannot change it. So it's like our job is to kind of strip away all of this nonsense that we've learned, and lo and behold, what we find is something that's brilliant and beautiful and lovable. So once I just kind of let my body chemistry settle, then you can go, what if this is true? Think about that right now. Like, what if this is true? That I am amazing and beloved beyond description, that you've got all the help, all the support, all the smiles, all of the cheerleaders, all the everything that you can think of surrounding you with the voice of truth instead of this voice of falsehood that's taken preeminence in your mind. What if, like right now, can you even just let things be quiet long enough to say, what if this could be true? What do you think about that?
I feel, much more peaceful when, sort of meditating on everything that you're saying. I just hope that next time an attack comes, that this side wins as opposed to the ego side.
It will.
That's
and
the
you
thing is like how to build that muscle.
Like with anything else. I mean, if anybody's going to be a weightlifter, you don't lift 400 pounds or whatever the first time you do it. Or if you're going to play the piano, you don't play, a beautiful concerto when you're first learning, like, where is middle C on the keyboard. In other words, practice is everything, building that spiritual muscle. But you just said something that is key. And it's so exciting. I love it when people say things like this. You said, just thinking about that, and I feel more peaceful. Bless your heart. You know what you just did? You just gave your brain a new signal. Instead of feeding it information that said, I'm a terrible, unlovable person, for just even this short period of time, you listened, you paid attention, you put your attention on an idea that I'm good and I'm valuable, and boy, I have a purpose here, as we all do, that's like no other. I'm not a cookie cutter person. I am a spiritual presence, part of everything. And when you thought about that, just for those few seconds, the message that your brain got was, I'm safe. I'm safe. If this could be what's true about me, no why would it wouldn't occur to me that any punishment would ever come? So that feeling of safety immediately changed your body chemistry. And so once again, that particular chemical cocktail that flooded all the cells in your body resulted in a different feeling tone. Now, we should all be jumping up and down with excitement that things can change that fast. And you did it. You actually paid attention to, even if it's only for a few seconds, those true ideas about you, and you got immediate results. Now, when you're feeling peaceful and you're feeling like you're doing your work and all's right with the world, like, how are you feeling this very second now?
Oh, I feel very peaceful right now.
Okay, and you notice right now, I don't know what time it is where you are, so I don't know if it's close to any sort of a regular meal time, but do you feel a desperate need to eat right now?
No.
Okay, there you go. In other words, if I'm not creating pain for myself, then I don't need to be addicted to something to self-medicate my pain. So if I stop creating pain for myself, automatically, whatever it is I'm doing to medicate the pain isn't going to operate anymore because I'm not feeling in pain. So I can just eat when I want to eat. I think you mentioned your ego said, oh no, in your email, oh no, I'm never going to be able to eat chocolate and pizza again. Well, of course you can eat chocolate and pizza again. You'll just eat it whenever it's appropriate in whatever appropriate amounts, and you won't gain weight. And you'll be eating not because you're medicating. You'll be eating because, well, at this particular moment, I'm at an Italian restaurant and I'm going to eat some pizza. In other
No,
words,
I remember it was.
the whole issue of food will become a non-issue.
But one thing, and I haven't touched on it, is also sort of like self-sabotaging physical appearance. You know, I'm not like obese, but I think that I always carry kind of like 10 or 15 pounds, which just always kind of keep me in this sort of self-loathing, like, you know, when it kind of comes to being in a bikini or fitting into a dress for a wedding, and it's always like, it's sort of always I want to kind of keep myself a little bit chubby so there's more evidence that I'm not an attractive person.
And you can see, again, this is, everything is all backwards. In other words, the whole idea of self-sabotage, the self-sabotage we're doing by not examining the stuff that we've brought forward from the time we were little, you know, all of that I am not okay stuff, that's where the self-sabotage is beginning. And then once you've been seduced into listening to this ego voice that says all the stuff that it says to you that's not true, then the whole issue of weight will also disappear. In other words, because when you're eating, just when you're actually really hungry, you will just naturally find your own right place to be. In other words, so that the issue isn't, how can I lose weight? The issue is back up at the head of the food chain here, no pun intended, back up at the head of this chain where it says, I have to keep remembering I'm safe. I'm cared for. They're specifically, the universe, if you want to call that, specifically knows my name. No, and by that I don't mean your name, Kathy, but you are recognized. You're recognized as loved and good. So that as that more is what you're thinking about, then that idea, like everything else, resolves the weight issue. And when you say, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that every time that I have conquered my weight issue or been at my thinnest, it was when I was in a happy space, and it wasn't by force and by diet. It was like I did only eat when I was hungry, and I wouldn't be binging, so my weight would naturally fall off. And
absolutely,
it's sort of I know that diets don't work because they just make me think about food more.
Well, exactly, because a diet makes you think about what the problem is, and here's what people don't realize. In other words, if you're always thinking, I have to diet because I'm too fat, I have to diet because I'm too fat, I have to diet because I'm too fat, the universe doesn't hear the first part of that sentence, which says, I have to diet because. All it hears is the declaration, I am too fat. And with the power inherent in the presence of you, that declarative statement is bringing to pass exactly what you think you're fighting against. But, the universe doesn't know anything about any fighting against. All it hears is your statement, I'm too fat, and it goes, okay, if that's what you want, we'll work this out so you can be too fat. So that's why being against anything always makes it stronger. Because when you're when you're against something, you're paying attention to it. Like, I'm paying attention to how much I don't want this weight. I'm paying attention to how much I don't want this weight. Well, the only part the universe is hearing is this weight. This weight, this weight, and it's turning it into a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you cannot, with impunity, think about what you don't want or focus on what you don't want and expect to have anything more than more of the same. Which is why learning how to be happy is the key. When you said, I just automatically don't have any problem with weight when I feel happy. Well, I can't feel unsafe and happy at the same time. So I cannot indulge these old false notions of I'm unlovable and I can't do anything right and be happy because those thoughts are going to create a sense of lack of safety in you. And then everything else that falls from that. So the only way I can be happy is when I feel safe. The only way I can feel safe is to have a much more generous and compassionate and loving sense of myself. And here's the great thing. Once you are kinder to yourself and have a softer approach to yourself, so will everyone else. It will kind of sit there in your energy field as certainly we all make mistakes, but I am a brilliant, lovable, adorable, precious person. And you'll notice somehow people start treating you that way.
Can I ask, you said earlier you were talking about that, we're born, we carry in this DNA and the beliefs that we have about ourselves. So are you saying that our parents, like it's the chicken and an egg thing, that, when we were born, that we didn't believe that we were good enough. So our parents treat us that way, or is it that the programming that our parents gave us? Like, which comes first?
Well, what actually, according now to some of the new biology, is at the moment of conception, where the sperm and the egg come together, shall we say, the unfinished business from our ancestral lines, all the places where their DNA was closed because of their feelings of fear or of guilt or of anger or whatever, it's like, oh, we get this interesting mix. So we start out with some DNA that's closed. So then, because none of us have parents who necessarily know what they're doing, all sorts of inappropriate parenting things add to the stew. So it's a little of both. In other words, we bring stuff with us that you can't say is their fault because they brought stuff with them, but then they add to it. But that's why it's never an accident. A Course in Miracles talks about the fact you pretend like you just came into a world that was already here and you didn't have anything to do with it. And it says, no, you found what you were looking for when you came. In other words, and this gets way too complex to go into right now, but it's like the way we experience our parents from the beginning is the way we're already habituated even from the beginning to experience them. So it's like, just because I'm a tiny little baby doesn't mean I have a tiny little energy field. In other words, the presence that we are is the presence that we are, and that doesn't have anything to do with size or scale or experience or time or anything else. That's a very timeless thing. So in part, we create the parents we experience. And that is always interestingly borne out when in some cases you'll have a half a dozen kids in a family, and as people say, each child in that family has a different set of parents. They're all the same biological parents, but the relationship between any given child and the parents have just one brother. And I am positive that, because we talked about it, when we were younger and while he was still alive, that we would describe our parents in some way the same and in some ways not the same at all. Because our consciousness is feeding into the mix of my relationship with my parents. And I've had some pretty dramatic experience. My parents were perfectly nice, garden variety, not necessarily knowing about early childhood development kind of people, but it was nothing that was wildly or even mildly physically abusive or anything like that. But And I remember feeling for a long time like my father was a very emotionally unavailable and distant person. And many years ago, when I was learning about a lot of this, and I really began to allow myself to express some unexpressed emotional stuff that I was carrying around. Now, I naturally did not tell him that I was releasing stuff related to him in the true sense of forgiveness, because his perspective would have been, what? What's there to forgive? I'm sure he would have considered himself a perfectly appropriate parent, from his perspective. But the next time I saw him after I did this, which was Christmas time, so let's say it was 5 months after I did some of this, really allowing myself to experience some of my emotional states, mysteriously, and I put that in quotes because it's not mysterious at all now, but it certainly seemed like it then, he seemed like a different person. He seemed to be more demonstrative. He seemed to, hug me more. He seemed to smile more. And when I left with my husband and little kids, he gave me some more money, and he said, oh, I just want you to have this in addition to your Christmas present. I was just blown away. It was one of my early dramatic experiences that when one person changes their minds and lets go of some of their emotional stuff, time and distance have no effect. The other people get it. And his behavior was so distinctly and observably, at least to me, different. I was just blown away by the whole thing. And you can be too. In other words, where it seems like you've got a father that forgets you, I would just challenge you. I don't know when you will see him next, but as you go, okay, it's time for me to be my own advocate instead of letting this monstrous ego that wants to do nothing but just beat you up all the time. It's like, I'm over this. I need a different kind of cheerleader. I need my own inner sense that I have a right to be here. And I'm going to take care of myself. I'm not taking care of myself when I just go from year to year to year, kind of just acquiescing to the idea that, and it is a kind of acquiescence, to the idea of, I can't do anything right and I'm no good. It's like time to stand up for the reality of yourself. What do you think?
It sounds wonderful. I hope that I can sustain it.
You absolutely will, because remember, you only have to sustain it 1 hour at a time. I know the AA people talk about, 1 day at a time is the only time you have to be thinking about doing things differently. Well, in the beginning, I would reduce it down to only this 1 hour do I have to remember this. It's too daunting to think about. I have to change my mind the rest of my life, because that isn't a helpful way to approach it. But you think, okay, right now, because in our short time together, you've proven to yourself that when you entertain different thoughts about yourself, you immediately changed your body chemistry and thus your feeling state. I didn't do that to you. You did that to you because you were willing to just pay attention and change your mind. And if you can do that once, you can do it over and over and over again.
So, thank you so much, Carol.
Well, let me just remind you of this one last important thing, and that is, when you find yourself in the grip of upset, where you feel like you want to cry or where you feel unfairly dealt with or whatever it is, and these moments still come up for me, but at least happily, I know what they're about. I can get on top of it quickly. I can let myself be in whatever that distress state for whatever length of time. The point is, it still happens, but briefly, and I know what to do about it. And it gets resolved quickly, and I get back to my, shall we say, my normal baseline state, which is all's right with the world, so to speak. And so feel what you feel with a more welcome, open heart than you ever have before. And once things start to dissipate, then step 2, you get on the business of loving yourself, pick up little 3-year-old Kathy in your mind's eye and sit in a rocking chair and hold her and put her head on your shoulder and rock her and adore her and tell her, I'm taking care of you now. You're just a precious little girl, and I'm here for you 100%. That's your job to do now. When the ego mind wants to go, blah, 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 here's what's the matter with you, back to your corner. I've got the business of taking care of this little girl. Now I'm in charge and I will do it. Can you feel the sense of strength that comes in when you make that statement? I'm taking care of me/her now.
Yeah, it's very relaxing.
Wonderful. Again, you see how fast things can shift. Okay, does any last thing occur to you, or this you need to pay attention to, listen to over and over again, look at the big picture?
I'm glad I have this recording, so hopefully next time a tornado comes in that it's just remembering, and just
yes, and it's practice. It's like, I'm not going to be afraid of the tornado. Okay, so the tornado's going to come through. Okay.
Yeah,
it's
I think
that
food's
kind of
a tricky one.
Yes. Okay, my dear.
Okay. Well, no, thank you so much for giving me your time.
And please write to me and just let me know what happens in the next couple of weeks as you practice this differently.
I will. Thank you so much.
All right, dear. Bye. Well, I surely hope you took all this to heart. Just change the details a little bit and could see yourself in Kathy's place. We are all so in the same boat, since learning untrue things about ourselves is inevitable at this stage of our development. But also, mercifully, we now can know what has happened, how we've been programmed, and how to change our minds and enjoy a very different quality of life based on the conviction of our goodness and our worth, rather than being some kind of an unlovable nuisance. Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And these old childhood beliefs are what must be examined, and that's what our work is all about. I hope you noticed how immediately she felt better when, even for a few seconds, Kathy was willing to think of and focus on wonderful qualities that are inherent in her and in all of us, despite what our current behavior may be. So if you would like help with looking at what seems to keep you from feeling peaceful and beloved, please write to us at findingpeace@carolhowe.com and we'll take a look for a possible future episode. In the meantime, we wish you only the deep peace you so richly deserve. And we're going to hold that in mind for you until you adopt that for yourself. I'm so glad you've been here. I'll see you next week. Bye.